Welcome to Jessie Bear's Book Club, and today we'll be talking about one of my favourite authors, Philippa Gregory, and her Tudor Court and Cousin Wars series of books. Some of the books in this series are amazing and my all-time favourites, whereas some are not as great in my opinion. And today we are going to be ranking them worst to best. Number 15, The Last Tutor. I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy this book. It took me 3 separate goes to read it. I found Jane Grey annoying and unrealistically self-righteous. And I found Catherine Grey to be thoroughly boring and too much like Kitty Howard to be interesting. But I may be biased, as I had already read Innocent Traitor and Dangerous Inheritance by Alison Weir that cover the same subjects, but I feel these books have much better fleshed out realistic characters. Number 14, The Other Queen. This book ranks so low because it lacks the spark that would have made it great. Mary Queen of Scots has interesting moments, but nothing lasts, and George Talbot is a wet blanket at best. Bess of Hardwicke is interesting, but there isn't enough of her in this book to really save it or make it great. Number 13, The Taming of the Queen. I found this book a bit over the top and grotesque in its descriptions of Henry VIII. I know these descriptions are following on from the Boleyn inheritance, but I just found it too much. It took away from the story for me. I found the scene with the portrait great though, and Catherine Parr's horror and pain at being usurped by a dead woman was great. But in contrast to that great scene, the punishment scene between Catherine and Henry is too 50 Shades of Grey for my taste. Number 12, The King's Curse. I found Margaret Pole quite interesting. Her friendship with Catherine of Aragon is very nice, and her care for the Princess Mary is compelling, but as a mother, Margaret Pole is lacking. Her treatment of her own children, especially Reginald, leaves a lot to be desired, and I found her hard to connect with because of it. The book is a slow read, but worth it if you're very interested in Tudor politics. Number 11, Three Sisters, Three Queens. I had been waiting for years for a book about Margaret Tudor, Queen of Scots, to come out, and I was very excited for this book. I liked Margaret, and thought her jealousy of her sisters very human in someone in that situation. She didn't always make the smartest decisions in love or in statecraft, but she always tried her very best, and she loved her children, and she grew to love Scotland. Number 10, Lady of the Rivers, a heartwarming true story of a woman giving up status and wealth for love. I enjoy the scenes in this book with Joan of Arc, and I think they show medieval religious zeal very well. I also enjoy Jacquetta's view of Henry VI and Margaret of Angoulême and their court. I didn't much care for the magic scenes in this book, however. I found them predictable, but I did enjoy how they are consistent in the rest of Philippa Gregory's work. She does keep magic on the same level. Number 9, The Queen's Fool. At the beginning of this book, I find Hannah a bit boring and bland, her infatuation with Robert Dudley being her only interesting feature. The magical aspects of her character I find boring, but that goes for most of Philippa Gregory's magical writing. Hannah redeemed herself, in my opinion, with her love for Daniel's child. With that love, she develops more strong personality characteristics. The more interesting aspects of this book are definitely Queen Mary I and Princess Elizabeth's relationship and interactions with King Philip. But because this plot is secondary to the plot of Hannah and her life, this book will never be one of my favourites. Number 8, The Virgin's Lover. This book follows straight on from The Queen's Fool, but is far more interesting because it centres around the unsolved mystery or murder, depending on who you ask, of Amy Dudley. The rise of William Cecil's spy network also features very heavily in this book. Amy and Robert Dudley's collapsing marriage is definitely a cautionary tale of marrying in haste only to repent at leisure. I also enjoyed the scenes in this book with Lettice Knowles. I thought her very much like her great-aunt Anne Boleyn. I find Queen Elizabeth in this book very bland and almost secondary to the other stories going on, so it will never be one of my favourite Tudor books. Number 7. The Red Queen follows the life of Margaret Beaufort during the largest events in the Civil War of the Wars of the Roses. I think this book is very realistic when it depicts how little power women could command in their own right at this time in history. This book is mainly political, but it does touch on the loss of childhood because of child marriage and very young motherhood at the age of 13. I really felt for Margaret, who never had a chance to find out who she would have been because of these traumatic events that happened so early in her life. I felt that Margaret used religion as a massive support because of these events in her young life. With the help of religion, Margaret comes to believe that she was born to be the mother of a king, but this is the only choice she really had as a woman at this point in history. Number 6. The White Queen. Like the Red Queen, this book follows the events of the Wars of the Roses and is mainly political, but is from the point of view and the opposite camp to the Red Queen of Elizabeth Woodville. Where Margaret Beaufort leans on religion for support, Elizabeth Woodville leans on magic. As I have said before, I don't normally think much of Philippa Gregory's depictions of magic, but in this case I thought it more grounded in reality and more plausible that people in the Middle Ages would have believed in such things. Elizabeth Woodville's switching of Richard of York in the Tower for a pauper's child I thought a brilliant twist, and very realistic as the actions of a worried mother. The love story of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV is famous and shown quite beautifully in this book, I feel. This book holds a special place in my heart because it helped me pass my English Literature GCSE, as the play we were reading at the time was Richard III, and I could use The White Queen as a modern guide to the same story. Number 5. The White Princess. The White Princess follows directly on from The White Queen and Red Queen, and mainly deals with the fallout from the plotting done in those two books. Elizabeth of York is forced into a position of marriage that she does not want, and her new husband and his family do not trust her, and this makes her life very difficult. She feels a natural resentment towards her mother, whose plotting led to this unwanted marriage, but she understands her mother's reasons and loves her anyway. The real climax of this book is the rebellion involving Perkin Warbeck, who Elizabeth knows to be her younger brother, the Duke of York, who her mother switched with the pauper in the previous book. She is torn by love for her brother and self-preservation and love for her own children. This is a gripping read and a situation no one would ever wish to find themselves in. Number 4. The Kingmaker's Daughter. This book takes place at the same time as The White and Red Queen, and it follows the life of Anne Neville as her father rises to power and then falls from power and switches coats, only to die on the battlefield, leaving her the widow to a dead rebel prince. All of this is a thrilling read, but I feel the best part of this book is Anne's rivalry and love for her sister Isabel. Philippa Gregory writes sisters' relationships very, very well, and this book showcases that talent to its fullest. I cried reading the scene where Isabel lost her baby and truly felt Anne's joy at becoming queen. It is also a great third perspective on the Wars of the Roses from a third powerful family. The Neville mistrust of the Woodvilles is given weight in this book, which was missing from the previous books in the series. It is a great rounding out to the Wars of the Roses series of books. This book was a gripping read that I could not put down and would highly recommend for anybody interested in the Wars of the Roses. Number 3. The Boleyn Inheritance. The second book of Philippa Gregory's I ever read. This book really stands out for me. The 3 point of view characters are so different in personalities and desires that it gives it a real can't stop reading feel. When thinking about this book, I think it is very important to think of the 3 characters separately. Anne of Cleves is remembered by history for being dull, But the Anne of Cleves in this book isn't dull at all. No small achievement. Her reasons for wanting to marry Henry VIII are relatable and understandable, and her pragmatic approach to giving him a divorce is so understandable to anybody in modern life. Kitty Howard was the plaything of the men around her and a practical orphan. She had little guidance or love in her life, and she went looking for love in all the wrong places, something many of us can understand and relate to, as she was only a teenager when Henry VIII made her queen for less than a year. Jane Rochford, however, completely steals the scene in this book. Her complete madness and rationalization of her actions, both past and present, are so interesting to read. Her mind is like a leaking cesspit, and after reading The Other Boleyn Girl, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. I would never want to meet anybody like Jane Rochford. Number 2. The Constant Princess. This book covers the early life of Catherine of Aragon when she arrived in England to marry Prince Arthur. This book really highlights the courage and fortitude it took to stay in England after Arthur's death and keep her promise to him. Her courage was forged during this time, and she used it later when fighting Henry VIII when he wanted a divorce. Though maybe not the most compelling piece of historical fiction ever read, it holds a special place in my heart, for like Catherine of Aragon, I grew up in Spain and moved to the UK aged 16. During that time in my life, I reread this book so many times as I found her character so relatable, and it will always hold a special place for me. Number 1. The Other Boleyn Girl. It comes as no surprise that The Other Boleyn Girl is top of my list. The first Philippa Gregory book I ever read, I completely fell in love with the Tudor Court, and haven't been able to stop reading historical fiction ever since. The protagonist of this book, Mary Boleyn, is lovable and likeable, but to me anyway, the real star of the show is Anne Boleyn. Her intelligence, her way of flirting, her energy is simply captivating, and her ambition is inspiring. As I mentioned before, Philippa Gregory is amazing at writing sisters' relationships, and this book is a masterpiece of sisterly nuance. The sisters are both remarkably similar and yet very different. They both have very different relationships with the king, and very different relationships with their brother George, both of which are tantalizing reads. George Boleyn's struggle with his own sexuality is also a brilliant side story, and a good read in its own right. One of my favourite books of all time. This book was read so much by me, the pages started to fall out. I hoped you all enjoyed my ranking of Philippa Gregory's Tudor Court and War of the Roses series. If you agree with me or disagree, please leave a comment below. And don't worry, I plan to talk about the TV shows and movies based on these books in upcoming videos. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe to Jessie Bear Book Club. See you all soon. Bye!